Before the words "captain speaking" ever left my mouth, I had to survive something much harder, being told I wasn't even allowed on the journey. My name is Ava Monroe. I'm 27 now, a commercial airline pilot, a captain. But once, not too long ago, I was just a quiet girl with wide eyes and a love for the sky that no one in my family could understand. Or worse, they understood and tried to kill it. I grew up in central Illinois, in a family where dreams were a luxury no one encouraged. My father was a third-generation farmer who believed in early mornings, hard work, and tradition. And tradition in our household came with unspoken rules, especially for girls. When I was 6 years old, I saw a plane take off for the first time. We were dropping off a distant cousin at a regional airport. I remember pressing my nose against the glass, heart pounding as the engines roared to life. I didn't blink. I didn't move. Something about how the giant machine lifted off the ground like it was born to fly, set something on fire inside me. That night, I asked my dad what it took to become a pilot. He laughed like I'd asked to become a dragon. Pilot? He repeated. That's not for girls like you, Ava. From that moment on, every time I saw a plane, my heart would ache a little. But I didn't stop dreaming. I couldn't. I read every book about aviation I could find at our tiny school library. I watched documentaries on NASA and commercial airlines. I started sketching cockpits in my notebook. While other girls collected jewelry and posters of pop stars, I had engine diagrams taped to the back of my bedroom door. But no matter how deep my love for flying grew, my family's disapproval grew faster. When I was 8, my mother passed away. A year later, my father remarried. Linda, my stepmother, was the kind of woman who could make you feel cold even in summer. She always wore tightly pinned hair, sharp blouses, and tighter expectations. She wasn't cruel exactly, but she believed girls had a place, and the cockpit wasn't it. "You really think they'll let a girl like you fly a plane?" she asked me when I was 12. "What happens when the weather gets rough? What happens when people need leadership? This is the real world, Ava, not your little fantasy." I tried to defend myself. "There are women pilots, thousands of them." "Sure," she said, sipping her tea. "And how many of them come from a place like this?" She always knew how to make me feel small without raising her voice. My father, he never argued. He'd shift in his chair, sigh, and say things like, "Let's be realistic, Ava. It's not like we have money lying around for expensive schooling." That was the other problem. Money? We weren't rich. Not even close. My father barely kept the farm afloat most seasons. But every time I mentioned flight school, Linda's reaction wasn't just about money. It was about principle. "I won't have us wasting our savings on a dream that's bound to crash," she said more than once. At 17, my obsession with planes had become the only thing that felt truly mine. I had a secret notebook where I wrote fake logbook entries, mapped imaginary flight routes, and planned the day I'd finally sit in a real cockpit. I knew better than to share it. In our house, dreaming big was a quiet, private act, something you did when no one was watching. That summer, everything came to a head. We were supposed to attend a cousin's wedding in Colorado. The venue was right near an airport that offered trial flights for teenagers. Just an hour with an instructor in a small training plane. I begged. I offered to use my own money, savings from babysitting and tutoring. "Just one flight," I said. "Please, it's all I've ever wanted." Linda looked at me like I had spit on her shoes. "Absolutely not." I turned to my dad. "Please, I've worked so hard." But he wouldn't meet my eyes. "No, Ava." "Why?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Why not?" Linda stood up slowly and said, calm as ever, "Because you're not part of this journey." I froze. Those words stayed with me long after they left for Colorado without me. Instead of boarding a plane or even watching one take off, I was enrolled in a summer etiquette course in town. They called it career awareness, but all it did was teach us how to smile politely and type a cover letter. I sat through every session imagining what it would have felt like to hold a yoke in my hands, to see the earth shrink below me, to feel like I was in control for once. I didn't cry, not then. Instead, I made a promise. They could lock me out of their version of the future. They could tell me I didn't belong in the sky. But one day, they would hear my voice coming through the speakers of a jet engine at 30,000 feet. And when they did, they'd finally understand. This dream was never a phase. It was my identity. And no one, not even family, could take that away. They told me I wasn't part of the journey. So I started walking it alone. Before I dive into my story, I want to know, where are you watching from today? And as you listen, let me know in the comments how this story makes you feel, or if you've ever experienced something similar. After the summer they left me behind, something inside me changed. Not just the dream, but the way I held it. I stopped asking, I stopped explaining, and most importantly, I stopped hoping for their approval. If they wouldn't help me fly, I would learn to build my own wings. At 17, I took a part-time job at the local diner, lied about saving for college, and stashed every spare dollar into an envelope buried beneath a loose floorboard in my closet. I signed up for free online prep courses on aviation theory and watched YouTube videos about cockpit instrumentation at night with my headphones plugged in and my door locked. During the day, I pretended to be the daughter they wanted, quiet, obedient, predictable. But by night, I was Ava Monroe, future pilot. It took almost a year of careful planning. I reached out to every low-cost aviation program in a 2-state radius. I wrote emails pretending to be my own guardian. When one school finally responded, a small aviation academy in northern Missouri, I cried so hard I couldn't see the acceptance letter through my tears. I was in. The program wasn't flashy. It wasn't a big-name school or a polished Air Force pipeline. It was a modest, hands-on civilian training program run by retired pilots and instructors who had once flown for commercial airlines. It was affordable, barely, and far enough that my parents wouldn't easily find out. I told them I got into a 2-week career readiness camp hosted by a nearby university. They didn't ask many questions. As long as it didn't involve airplanes, they assumed they had broken me down enough that I'd given up. What they didn't know was that every day at that camp, I sat inside real simulators, listened to real aviation instructors, and climbed into real aircraft. The first time I sat in a Cessna 172, my hands trembled. "Go ahead," the instructor said. "She's yours." The engine came to life under my fingers, and the vibration shook something loose in my chest. That small plane wasn't much to look at, but it was mine for those minutes. My voice cracked the first time I made a radio call, but I made it. I was flying. Those 2 weeks became 4 and then 8. I extended the program under the pretense of a continued internship. I picked up weekend jobs around campus to cover the fees. Every time I came home, I made up stories about spreadsheets and seminar lectures. Linda never really cared enough to probe. My dad, he just nodded vaguely. Happy I wasn't bringing up flight school anymore. But the closer I got to finishing the program, the heavier the secret became. I was nearing the final exam, the flight check that would determine whether I earned my private pilot's license. It was scheduled for a Saturday morning in late May. I had everything planned. I'd leave Friday afternoon, take a Greyhound to the academy, sleep in the student barracks, and show up early at the airstrip. Everything was ready, except Linda. She found the envelope, the one under the floorboard, the one with receipts, flight logs, printed syllabi, and a photo of me standing next to an instructor, beaming with my headset on. I came home Thursday night to find her sitting in the kitchen, holding the envelope like a loaded weapon. "What is this?" she asked. Her voice wasn't angry. It was quiet, controlled, dangerous. I froze. It's nothing." Her eyes narrowed. "You've been lying to us, sneaking around, taking flights." I said nothing. "You think this is funny? You think we're stupid?" She slammed the papers down on the table. Thomas. My father came in from the porch, wiping his hands on a rag. When he saw the papers, he stopped cold. She's been going to some aviation school, Linda said, her voice rising. Behind our backs. He looked at me, and for a second, just one, I thought I saw something different in his face. Fear? Disappointment? Shame. He didn't yell. He just stepped closer and said, Ava, is this true? I nodded. I couldn't lie anymore. You were told no, again and again, he said. And you still did it. Because it's who I am, I snapped. You never gave me a chance. I had to find one myself. His expression hardened. You're not leaving this house tomorrow. My mouth went dry. Dad, you heard me. I'm locking the front door. You won't embarrass this family again. That's final. I stared at him. At the man who had once carried me on his shoulders through cornfields, who had kissed my forehead when I had fevers. That man was gone. Or maybe he was never there. Maybe he only existed for the daughter he wanted me to be. That night, I sat in my room, fully dressed, my bag packed, my heart pounding. I watched the clock tick past midnight. Every window in the house was locked. Linda always checked. She was meticulous like that. Except the cellar. The old cellar door at the back of the house had a warped frame and a loose latch. I had discovered it once when I was 10, during a game of hide and seek. My father always meant to fix it, but he never did. At 3:12 a.m., I crept down the hallway, barefoot, silent. I opened the cellar, slipped out into the night, and ran. I ran through fields and back roads until I reached the town bus stop. My shoes were soaked in dew, my legs ached, but I kept running. Because the moment I stopped, I'd hear their voices again, telling me I wasn't meant for this, that it wasn't my place. But it was. The bus took 6 hours. I didn't sleep. I sat in the back with my hoodie up and my hands trembling. When I arrived at the school, the instructor was already waiting by the hangar. You good? He asked. I nodded. I'm ready. The check ride was brutal. Crosswind landings, emergency procedure drills, steep turns. My mind wanted to collapse under the pressure, but my body knew what to do. I remembered everything. And when the plane touched down after that final loop, the instructor turned to me, removed his headset, and said, Congratulations, Captain. You passed. I cried in the cockpit, silently, violently. It was the release of years of silence, years of being told I couldn't, I shouldn't, I mustn't. I could, I did. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just dreaming about the sky. I belonged in it. I didn't hear from my father after I passed the check ride. Not that I expected to. I assumed Linda burned every trace of me from the house the moment she realized I had escaped. The only thing louder than their silence was my freedom. And after all those years, I wasn't going to spend one more minute begging them to see me. They had made it clear. I wasn't part of their journey. So, I made a new one. I earned my private pilot's license by the end of that summer, then spent the next year flying anything I could get my hands on. Tiny cargo runs, regional hops, short hauls between sleepy airports. I studied, trained, worked through fatigue and self-doubt, and every invisible wall I had grown up with. Eventually, I earned my commercial license and climbed into the cockpit of my first jet. When I finally heard the words Captain Monroe, cleared for takeoff, I didn't cry. I smiled. It had taken nearly everything in me. But I had made it. I changed my number. I never went back home. If my father tried to reach me, I wouldn't have known. Maybe he regretted everything. Maybe he didn't. I had stopped looking for signs of softness in men who only understood control. But life has a strange sense of timing. And fate, apparently, has a twisted sense of humor. It was a typical Thursday morning out of Atlanta, Flight 742, nonstop to Denver. I had flown the route dozens of times. Blue skies, predictable crosswinds over Kansas, descent through light mountain turbulence. My first officer, Trey, was easy to work with. Young, focused, and didn't talk too much unless it mattered. We were 23 minutes into cruise altitude, sipping coffee and reviewing the weather updates, when the alert chimed. Hydraulic pressure fluctuation, Trey said, squinting at the screen. Primary system. I leaned in. He was right. Something wasn't reading properly. One of the indicators showed a drop in pressure, low, but enough to trigger concern. Switch to backup system. Run diagnostics, I said calmly. He nodded and started the checklist. I reached for the comm and notified ATC. Denver Center, this is Flight 742. Experiencing minor hydraulic issue. Proceeding per checklist. Copy 742. Keep us advised. At this point, it was still routine. Planes were built for redundancy. We trained for this. But then it got worse. Another alert. This time the cabin pressure warning flickered on, just long enough to make my stomach twist. Trey looked at me. You seeing this? Yeah, I said. Cross-check backup. Oxygen levels stable? He nodded. So far, but it's not consistent. Suddenly, the plane shook. Once, sharply. My hands tightened on the yoke. Altitude stable, I said. But something's not right. And then the call came from the back. A chime, followed by the flight attendant's voice in my headset. Captain, we have passengers feeling dizzy. Some say they can't breathe well. Trey looked at me. We need to descend. Immediately, I radioed ATC. Denver Center, this is Flight 742, declaring an emergency. Suspected cabin pressurization issue. Request emergency descent. 742, clear to descend to 10,000 feet. Turn heading 090. Roger that. I initiated the descent manually. The autopilot was sluggish. Every muscle in my body was tight, but my mind was razor sharp. This wasn't about fear. It was about precision. Announce emergency descent, I told Trey. He made the call to the cabin, voice steady. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your first officer speaking. We are experiencing a technical issue and will be making a rapid descent. Remain seated and follow instructions from the crew. The masks hadn't dropped yet, but we were preparing for it. We leveled at 10,000 feet. For a few minutes, things held, until they didn't. I heard the words no pilot ever wants to hear. Captain, there's smoke in the back galley. I stared straight ahead. Not now, not this. Locate source, prep fire protocol, I said through gritted teeth. Trey had already pulled up the procedure. It wasn't fire. Thank God. It was electrical. A short in one of the galley panels had triggered overheating. The smoke had already been handled by the cabin crew, but panic had spread like wildfire. Some passengers were crying. One was reportedly hyperventilating. Someone else had fainted. I glanced at Trey. Time to destination? 31 minutes. I took a breath. We're going to hold this bird together for 31 more minutes. And we did. I coordinated everything. Diagnostics, system resets, airflow management, fuel monitoring. We rerouted air to minimize discomfort, stabilized cabin environment, reassured the crew, and stayed in constant communication with ATC. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. When we landed in Denver, emergency crews were already waiting on the runway. The passengers clapped, some cried, and the cabin filled with a kind of electricity you can't fake. Relief, gratitude, awe. I walked through the aisle as they disembarked, thanking each passenger. Then, just before the last row cleared, I heard it. A voice. Familiar, too familiar. Thomas, are you okay? My blood froze. I turned. There they were, my father, Linda, sitting in row 28. They hadn't noticed me. Not yet. Linda was still clutching the armrest, visibly shaken. My father was pale, holding his chest like it hurt. They were passengers on my flight. My hands went cold. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to scream. I wanted to laugh. They had always told me I didn't belong up here, that I wasn't part of the journey. And now, when the journey had nearly fallen apart, I was the one who kept them safe. They exited without looking back. They never even knew who had been flying the plane. But I knew, and that was enough. There are moments in life that don't feel real as they happen. You live them in silence, like you're watching someone else's memory. The weight hits only later, once the dust has settled, once you've walked away. This was one of those moments. Flight 742 had landed safely. The emergency response team cleared us. There was no fire, no loss of life, no damage to the aircraft itself, just a cabin full of shaken passengers and a crew that would probably remember the descent for the rest of their careers. I had made it. We had made it. I stayed in the cockpit while Trey handled the passenger exit briefing. My hands hovered over the controls, fingers twitching from the adrenaline that hadn't yet faded. Then I heard it, over the airport intercom. Captain Ava Monroe, please report to Gate 34. Passenger assistance request. My chest tightened. It wasn't protocol, not exactly. But when a captain lands a plane under emergency conditions, it's not uncommon for passengers to ask for the chance to say thank you, to put a face to the voice that got them down in one piece. I stepped into the terminal with my hat tucked under my arm, still in full uniform, still replaying every checklist and radio call in my head. A small crowd had gathered near the gate, some passengers, a few crew members, a ground agent. And then I saw them. Row 28, Linda, and beside her, my father. He saw me first. I don't know what I expected. Surprise, maybe, confusion. But the moment his eyes landed on me, he stopped breathing. Ava. I didn't answer. Not yet. I stood still, letting the recognition hit him like a wave. Linda's mouth opened, then closed, and then, like a slow unraveling, I saw it in her face, the full realization, the horror of it, the contradiction they'd never prepared for. The girl they said could never fly had just saved their lives from 30,000 feet. My father stepped forward. You were the pilot? I nodded. Yes, Captain Monroe. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in a minute. His eyes searched my face like he needed proof, like he still didn't believe it. That was you? His voice cracked. The voice on the intercom? The one who brought us down? I didn't blink. Yes, that was me. There was a long silence. Then, I didn't know. I inhaled through my nose slowly. Number you didn't want to know. His face twitched like I'd struck him. Good. You told me I wasn't part of this journey, I said, my voice low but steady. You said I didn't belong in the sky, that I was wasting my time, wasting your money, embarrassing the family. And now here you are, alive, because I didn't listen to you. Linda reached out. Ava. No. I turned to her. You don't get to speak now. Not after all the times you told me it was impossible. Not after you locked me in that house like a prisoner, like some silly girl who didn't know her place. My father tried again. We didn't understand. No, I snapped. You didn't try. That's the difference. There was a tremble in his mouth, in his eyes. I saw it now. Regret, heavy, belated, and utterly useless. You wanted me to be smaller, I said. But I never was. I just made myself smaller to fit inside your world. But now I build my own cockpit. I set my own altitude. He lowered his head. I was wrong. I paused. That wasn't what I'd expected. And still, some part of me wanted to hear it. I was afraid, he continued, eyes on the ground, afraid you'd fall, that I'd lose another woman I loved to something I couldn't control. And Linda, she only made it worse. I let her voice get louder than mine. I let fear speak for me. I didn't speak, because I wasn't ready to forgive. I'm proud of you, Ava, he said, tears now rolling down his cheeks. I don't deserve to be, but I am. Those words hit me in the softest part of my heart, the part I'd buried years ago. The child inside me, who had waited forever to hear that sentence, stirred. But I wasn't a child anymore. I stood tall. "You don't have to be proud of me," I said. "I already am." His shoulders collapsed, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt freedom. Linda turned away, wordless. Her pride wouldn't let her say a thing. That was fine. She was no longer part of my story. My father stepped back into the crowd, and the airport noise swelled around us again. I turned to go, past the gate, past the memories, past everything that tried to hold me down. I didn't need applause. I didn't need recognition. I had flown the plane, and that was enough. As I reached the next terminal, I heard a little girl gasp behind me. "Daddy, is that the lady who flew our plane?" I turned, smiled. The father nodded. "That's her. That's the captain." I met the girl's eyes. She was maybe 7, hair in braids, a spark in her stare. She waved shyly. I saluted, then turned and walked into the rest of my journey, alone above them, finally free.